As you wait for the class to start, please take part in the poll meeting, and the instructions are on the screen. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this specially curated masterclass, which is part of NUS Open House 2022. We would like to remind you to please set your phone to silent to minimize any disruption. With that, we would like to welcome Dr. Sean Teo, who will be sharing on Rising Asia, asking the question, is the world-class city sustainable? Dr. Teo.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for giving up your Saturday to come and here to speak. My name is Sean Teo, and I'm Assistant Professor in the Department of Geography here at the National University of Singapore. Today I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Kamali Rondas, who is Senior Lecturer in the same department. And today, I want to take some time to talk to you about cities. Right, each and every single one of us seated here today, we live in a city, right, and quite an influential and popular one at that, right? But we don't just live in cities, right? We read about cities. For those of you who love reading, I'm sure you've come across at least one of these books, right? Popular books on cities that tell us things about cities and urban life and urban governance and urban politics, things like that. Right, but more recently as well, of course, we started to consume a lot of media, right, about cities. Okay, not just movies, right? These are three of my favorite movies on cities. If you haven't watched them, okay, I do suggest please go and watch them. But also Netflix, documentaries, and things like that, right? It tells us a lot about cities in different ways. And of course, we also travel to other cities to consume experiences that are quite different from our own here in Singapore. Of course, in the past 2 years, I'm sure very little traveling has been done, but hopefully, okay, moving forward, we can start to travel more. And some of you here as well, I'm sure in your earlier education, right, you've taken some lessons or modules that have to do with cities in one way or another, right? So what I'm trying to say here, right, is that all of you seated here, okay, now a young adult, you all would have already accumulated some kind of knowledge on cities and what cities represent and what they need to do. And this knowledge can be very personal, okay, but can be very collective as well, in the sense whereby we have some shared understandings of what cities mean. So today's masterclass, I just want you to think about it as a thought experiment, okay? I want to get you to rethink what you think you know about cities, okay? Specifically through the lens of a rising Asia. Right? So in the face of increasing Asian influence around the world, okay, I want you to ask the question, how can we rethink what we know about cities and urbanism today, okay, through thinking about Asian cities? Okay, and how this will unfold, of course, I will start to unravel the elements one by one as we move on. All right? Now, when all of you filtered in just now, right, we asked some of you to do an activity, right? Activity was simple. Name the first 3 global cities that come to mind. Okay, let's have a look at this word cloud here. Right? Very obviously, we see Singapore. I mean, that's very obvious. I don't tell you why, because we are Singaporeans, we understand. Okay? But we also see New York and London featuring most prominently in the word cloud here. All right, we see, Berlin, right? We see Shanghai, we see Tokyo, right? We see Beijing. Okay, but what is very obvious is that when we talk about global cities, or if I ask you all to name global cities, the very instinctive reaction is to name cities that are from the West, especially New York, London, right? And someone also named Chicago before it was, it's right there at the top, right? So our imagination, by and large, is quite captured by the fact that West is best, and Asia and the rest of the world are catching up, so to speak, right? Of course, some of you have named cities like Shanghai, okay, Beijing, of course, because recently the ascendancy of China cannot be ignored, and it is precisely the ascendancy of most Asian cities today, not just Chinese cities, that cannot be ignored, that we have the opportunity to study urbanism from a different angle. All right? Let me kind of, corroborate this with another experiment, right? So look at this picture. Okay? You don't have to tell me what city this is, but if you know what city this is, okay, by looking at this picture, please raise your hands. Yeah, you just gently raise your hand, it's fine. Okay? So I can see definitely about more than 3/4 of you raising your hands, right? And if you would like to travel or work or live in this city for a short term or long term, any period of time, sometime in the future, if you're open to that option, please raise your hand as well. Okay, almost the same number as people raising hands just now. So what does this tell us, right? This city obviously is London, right? You can see Big Ben. Okay, Big Ben. You can see Westminster, which is the Parliament House. And of course, you can see the iconic red London buses. But most of us, at one glance, we know what London is, right? And we also have certain interpretations or imagination of London. Right? We consume a lot of knowledge about cities like London and New York City. And therefore, it does, kind of make us want to go there, live there, study there, work there, whatever, right? So this proves one point. When we think about global cities, right, we equate global cities with modernity. We think about cities like London and New York as, epitomes of modernity, right, whereby they set a standard for other cities to follow. And coincidentally, a lot of these cities are located in the West, okay? Now, let me move on to the next one. Now, if anyone can know what this city is, okay, I'll be very impressed. Okay, please impress me. If anyone knows what this city is just by looking at this photo, please raise your hand. Okay, not a single one of you, compared to more than 3/4 of you just now. Now, the same question I have to ask just to be fair, right? Would anyone want to live in, work in, or go and travel to this city in sometime near or far? Okay, even if you don't know what the city is, maybe you're just looking at this picture. Would you want to go? If you want to go, please raise your hand. Okay, one person. Great. Okay, like the unknown, you like the adventures. Great. But what I'm trying to get to with this, right, is that, okay, this is Jakarta. Okay, obviously all of you know what Jakarta is, right? It's capital of Indonesia. Right, but from its landscape itself, it's not so immediately arrestable that this is Jakarta. Right? And this really proves a point that when we're thinking about how knowledge is produced about cities, the very famous cities in the West, the so-called global cities, right, are given a lot of attention, such that everyone knows what London, what New York is, what it represents. But none of us really know that much about what Jakarta represents, other than the fact that it's the capital of Indonesia. Right? And because you don't know so much about Jakarta, naturally, you wouldn't want to go and travel there or spend time there and know the ground better. Right? In particular, if you look at this photo, right? We look at Jakarta in the background as having all these skyscrapers, just like any normal city would, right? But what we also see here in the foreground is this whole hodgepodge of informal settlements, informal buildings that are sometimes built without regulation, right? And therefore, they lend to a quite an unruly and messy extent. And that's exactly the problem with urban studies or urban geography today, right? We see Western cities, okay, and put them on a pedestal, okay, and Asian cities such as Jakarta, we call them mega cities, or cities that are not global, or cities that are yet to be global, or cities that are trying to go global. And as a result, we see all these negative externalities of rapid urbanization, like slums and the like, and things like that. Okay? But what is the problem with this, right? What is the problem with this? Okay, please have a look at this graph, okay? And tell me if you can see any specific trend. So this is a graph of average, okay, city GDP growth, right? GDP as in gross domestic product, right? How much a city earns in a given year, okay? From 2016 to 2035. So this is a reflection of real world trends as well as a projection towards the future, okay? Have a look, okay, and think about what trends you can identify. Okay, if you don't mind me, young man, since you were so brave to sit in front, could you just maybe just shout out, what do you think? Can you identify any trends in the graph? Any idea? Or anyone? You can just shout out. No? Don't be shy. Go ahead. Go ahead, no worries. Okay, let me give you a clue, right? We're thinking about which regions in the world, right, are growing rapidly, both in terms of GDP, okay, and in terms of urbanization rate, because these come hand in hand, right? We look at the bottom of growth. As you can see, North America and Europe, okay, they're at the bottom, right? Whereas at the top, you see China, Africa, the Middle East, rest of Asia, okay, at the top four here. So what reality tells us is that, the West is no longer growing at the rate that it used to be all those decades ago. Okay, and that if we want to know more about the real world today, it might perhaps be better if we focus on some of the fastest growers and the movers and shakers of the global urban economy, right? So what I want to do is, okay, as geographers and, okay, particularly to myself, my research interest, right, is that I would like to propose studying Asian cities on their own terms. Okay, when I say on their own terms, I mean we don't automatically see a city like Jakarta as not yet global. But what we do is we go down Jakarta, right? We look at Jakarta from the ground, okay? We conduct extensive field work in Jakarta, look at some of these interesting things and strategies and developments that are happening in Jakarta, and then we make our own interpretation from there, rather than beforehand just saying that, Jakarta is not yet global, there are many problems in Jakarta, there are slums and this, that, etc. Right? So in doing that, then we could possibly have the potential for rethinking contemporary urbanism through urban Asia. So rather than thinking about contemporary urbanism to the West, which most of us up to this point in our lives still do, okay, and there's nothing wrong with that, okay, but rethinking contemporary urbanism through Asia or Asian cities is another opportunity that I think we should all explore, okay? Now, what are the key principles of Asian urbanism, right? Let me share with you a couple. Okay, number one, we think about this idea and this movement from a global to a world-class city aspiration. Okay, this means that cities like Shanghai, Beijing, even Jakarta, right, they no longer want to be the next London, New York, Paris, right? It's passé in that sense. What they want to do is they want to be even better, or rather put it more accurately, they want to do something very different. Okay, very different from what London, New York, and Paris have done. Okay, so I would consider this idea, okay, to be the world-class city, right? Governments are no longer talking about global city per se, they're talking about world-class city now. All right. Number two, the key difference between Asian and Western urbanism is the speed, skill, and extent. Okay, and this leads to various unique forms of development. Okay, the actual material form of development that you see in cities today. Okay, I want to share with you one today called urban mega projects. Okay, when we used to think about development in terms of buildings, right, individual buildings and things like that. But governments, developers these days, right, they're not just building individual buildings. They are building entire precincts, okay, that can fundamentally change the face and the fate of a city. Okay, and of course, as Singaporeans, I'm sure you are familiar with Marina Bay Sands, entire business improvement district. Okay, the planning is not just building for building, it's everything, it's holistic. Okay, and this is one of the more unique forms of Asian urbanism that we are seeing. But mega projects are not just mega projects, right? They are specifically packaged and marketed in certain ways. Okay, one of the most popular strategies and discourses that you hear today is sustainable development. I'm sure all of you sit there have heard of this term. Okay, but really, what does this term actually entail? Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, okay, today. Right, and in thinking about Asian urbanisms, right, and these unique new forms like urban mega projects, couched in the idea of sustainable development, okay, I think we also owe it to ourselves to ask, what are the affordances and limitation of these things? Okay, meaning we need to think about inequality that I mentioned, because we know that urbanism is deeply unequal. We're all very privileged, right? I mean, I would expect most of us to be very privileged, okay? But we also need to think about how our actions, how the actions of governments affect those who are possibly less privileged. Okay, urbanization creates winners and losers. All right, but we also need to think about the opportunities. Okay, so it's not just about criticizing. It's about thinking about opportunities, okay, for a better urban life. Okay, not just for the most marginalized, but for everyone in general as well. Okay, so these are the facets of an Asian urbanism that I'm trying to present to you today. Okay, and I'm gonna, of course, as we are geographers, I'm gonna give you a real life case study, right, to kind of concretize some of my arguments that I just made. Okay, I'm gonna bring you a mega project, okay, from Tianjin in China. Some of you may have heard of Tianjin, but I'm very sure not many of us really know that much about Tianjin. And this is exactly what I'm trying to say. Right? Rather than just discounting Tianjin as just another city that's catching up, we could potentially see cities like Tianjin, okay, as leaders, right? Leaders in development of some of the most unique urban experiments in the world today. Okay, and the Tianjin Eco City, which I will be talking about, was basically an entire city built from scratch. So this is what it looks like, okay, or what it looks like rather, before they built it. Okay, just marshland, swampland, okay? And this, oh, okay, I apologize. Apparently the animation is not working, but don't worry, there will be pictures of the completed Tianjin Eco City later, okay? But let me go through some of the key elements with you here. So just take some time, okay, just take 30 seconds to quickly read through some of this stuff. Okay, and these are excerpts, okay, from Minister Lawrence Wong's opening address at the opening ceremony of it. Okay, if you're wondering why Minister Lawrence Wong was there, okay, it's because the Tianjin Eco City is a joint project between Singapore and the Tianjin government. Okay, and Minister Lawrence Wong said that, when we think about the Tianjin Eco City, we want to think about the environment, the economy, and people together. Okay, what this means, right, is that sustainable development is not just an environmental concern. A lot of people think, okay, mistakenly that sustainable development is just about the environment. It's not. It's about harmonizing the environment, the economy, and the social, which is the people, right? Social. Okay, so how does that play out in practice, right, materially? That's number one. And number two, what Tianjin is trying to do is relevant for the rest of the world, because this is not just a one-off project. As you see here from the second excerpt here, right? China's aspiration is to develop a model of sustainable development by using Tianjin as a pilot project. Okay, and the ambition really is to disseminate this model to as much of the world as possible. So we can see the Tianjin Eco City as a very good case study to help us understand what governments are trying to do to push the frontiers of sustainable development and the world-class city as well. Okay. Now, there you are. Okay, so now you can see this is what Tianjin looks like today. Okay, I want to share with you a little bit, okay, of some of the key elements of Tianjin. Okay, number one, it costs about $10 billion to build so far. Okay, so far it's still ongoing. Okay. Number two, it is 3 times the size of Sengkang. Okay, so I mean, not too big but not too small either, right? Certainly not a small project. Okay. It aims to house 350,000 residents, okay, but it's not there yet. It's getting there. And the most unique thing about this city is that it's built on certain eco KPI, right? So you can see on the screen, I'm not going to read out for you, but you can have a read, right? So the government's objective is to build these buildings with these kinds of eco elements in mind, all right? So I've told you a little bit about Tianjin Eco City, right? I've told you a little bit about it, so you probably have a little bit of an understanding of what it is. But what I want to do today, right, is as I'm a geographer, okay, and as geographers, we like to go down to the ground, as I mentioned, to really do deep kind of studies to understand what's happening, so that we can critically interrogate what we know about this so-called eco city, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of photos, and these photos were all taken by researchers that went to Tianjin City, okay, to have a look and take photos and things like that. And I'm going to offer you a set of problematizations of questions to think about. Okay, so number one, this is a typical kind of gated community neighborhood in the eco city, right? Sort of like a condominium kind of thing. This researcher found that, you see this wind turbine, this solar powered lamppost, and okay, wind turbines as well. So like I mentioned, just on eco technology, right? But what the funny thing is that this researcher found out, right, that the residents told him that these things don't work at all. Okay, so I don't know whether the government turned it off temporarily or whether they're literally just there for show. But residents have been living there for 1 or 2 years, they've never seen this thing turned on, even the street lamps. Okay, so this begs the question, right? Is the eco city about aesthetics, as you can see here, right? Really nice kind of garden vibes, garden aesthetics. Okay, this is just one picture. Entire eco city is of trees, stuff like that, green sculptures, things like that. But is the eco city about aesthetics only, okay, or is it about really benefiting from technology? Number one. Okay. Next photo. This is a community recycling receptacle, right? So residents who live in these neighborhoods, the eco city, they need to recycle, they need to come down, sort out their recyclables and stuff like that. Okay. This researcher found that literally nobody uses this thing, right? Like literally nobody. Okay, and this really, I mean, if you watch Korean dramas, I'm sure a lot of you watch Korean dramas today, right? I'm sure you've seen scenes where the characters take their recycling really seriously, right? In Japan as well, Japanese will take their recycling really seriously. But the Chinese, as well as us Singaporeans, we don't take our recycling seriously. Okay, so this begs the question, right? Is it enough to say that it's sustainable development if you plant some kind of city, right? This mega project, or does sustainable development have to come from within us? Right? Do we have to rethink our relationship with nature, right, for a chance for sustainable development to be materialized? Okay, this is an important question to think about. It is also important to think about how the eco-city is being built, right? The eco-city promises to be a sustainable development, but this photo, right, shows that there are many, in industries, small industries located in and around the eco-city, and these industries provide materials and resources such as concrete, okay, as you see here. And this researcher found that the practices of construction are extremely unsustainable, right? They pour waste into the ground, into the rivers, and all that kind of stuff. Right? So isn't it ironic that the so-called eco-city is built upon unsustainable practices? So we need to ask ourselves, right? When we think about sustainable development, are we thinking about it just in terms of the space of the eco-city itself? Or do we have to think about sustainable development in wider terms, okay, in terms of the entire Tianjin city or even the entire nation of China, for example? Okay, and not to forget, who builds these eco-cities? Okay, thousands of migrants that come from near and far in China. These migrants will never get a chance to stay in these eco-cities. This is not just a financial consideration. In China, there's a household registration system. And because these migrants are not registered to Tianjin, they will never be able to afford or even qualify for public housing. So the question is this, right? The eco-city is supposed to be socially sustainable. But people who build these cities, do they even get a chance to enjoy these cities? And this question is extremely relevant for Singapore as well. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, right? Our city is literally built by thousands and thousands of migrant workers. Do they get to enjoy the city? I don't know. I'll leave it as an open question. Okay, so that's why I've talked to you about the environmental and social contradictions of the eco-city. And there are economic contradictions as well, right? Lots of people, when Tianjin was just starting to get built, people criticized Tianjin Eco City as a ghost city. And I'm sure you all know that China is home to maybe dozens or even hundreds of ghost cities. So people actually criticize the Chinese government's way of development, saying that they just build these giant cities and then hope that people come. But nobody comes, right? Because while they were building a lot of residential stuff, they were not building the critical infrastructure like schools and transport, things like that. So therefore, a lot of these buildings were left empty. Okay? So I've given you some questions to think about, right? Not to take the eco-city for granted, or not to take sustainability or world-class for granted, but to ask important questions. And it is through thinking about these questions and finding out answers to them, right, then you will improve your learning process. But geography or critical geography is not just about critiquing, right? It's not just about saying, the government's bad, this, that, blah, 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 right? It's not. Like I said, it's also about thinking more pragmatically and finding solutions. So can we think about the eco-city as a longer-term project rather than just a one-off kind of thing, right? So this is a press release from Enterprise Singapore, okay, which shows that Singapore and Tianjin just recently renewed their commitment to continue constructing the eco-city. Okay, so this is a long-term project. Okay, it's by no means done. Okay, it's halfway there. Okay, but what we can see today from their website, okay, you can see here that now there's about 100,000 people living there, and you can read here, okay, all the amenities are now going up bit by bit. And most importantly, right, the Trans-City Railway has been built, connecting people from Tianjin to other cities, because a lot of people commute, right, to work and live there. So if you start to think about the eco-city as a progressive project, okay, a longer-term one, okay, not just as a one-off, then we can potentially start to see the relevance and the potential of this kind of model of sustainable development and world-class cities. But this is not to say that it doesn't come with its limitations as well. So as critical geographers, we try to balance, okay, the critiques and the affordances, okay, to formulate, okay, a more nuanced argumentation. Okay, so never okay, we seldom always go just to one polemical side. Some always say this is definitely this or this is definitely that, because we know that there is always a gray area. All right. So we can see perhaps Tianjin Eco City now today as residents really having the opportunity to perhaps renew their relationship with nature. And as I mentioned just now, I personally think that our relationship with nature is really, really important if sustainable development is actually going to materialize. Okay, so this is something for you all to think about again. Now, what can we learn from Tianjin Eco City, right? The story that is told just now, right? What are some of the summaries of what we can learn? Okay, and in these summaries, right, okay, coincidentally, okay, these are some of the really important themes that our department specializes in as well. Okay, so you can look forward to that if you do come to our department. Number one, world-class cities and sustainable development are categories that have to be interrelated. Okay, they shouldn't be categories that you take for granted. Okay, you should literally start asking, what exactly is a world-class city? What exactly is sustainable development? Okay, and then you move on from there. Okay, you shouldn't just take what you read, okay, as the gospel truth. Okay, and in interrogating these categories, number one, okay, we need to think about the integration of economy, environment, and society, right? Like I said, okay, it's not just about the environment, it's about integration and harmony. Okay, number two, as I've already mentioned painstakingly, because I personally really believe in this, we might need to think about nature-society relationships as well. But we live among nature, and in Singapore especially, right, the government has recently done a city in nature. What does that really mean, right? Are we really having a very strong symbiotic relationship with nature, right? All of this aesthetic, like I just said, okay? Number three, we think about the geographies of migration. I give you an example just now of these, construction workers coming, building the city, but not being able to access it. Okay, and we have a very strong migration cluster here in our department as well. Okay, so I think that it's important to study migration, right? Not just at the top end, expatriates, but also at the bottom end as well. Okay, and finally, of course, last but definitely not least, right, the Eco City presents us opportunities to study environmental technologies and the technical side, the scientific side, okay, about eco development, sustainable development, things like that. And that's the beauty of the geography department, because not only do we have a social science arm, human geography, we also have an earth science arm, physical geography. And even more beautiful, right, our researchers, our professors, right, what we do is we often have conversations across the subdiscipline. Okay, these are not easy conversations because it's really hard to marry science with social science. But these are productive conversations nevertheless. So if you're interested in, kind of the earth sciences as well, like hydrology, urban climate, right, mangroves, for example, so these are all things you can look forward to as well. And more precisely, you can actually be an integrationist, right? So you can think of geography as a kind of small CHS within CHS. Okay, but if you don't want to integrate, you want to focus largely on human geography or physical geography, you can as well. Okay, we are flexible that way. And most importantly, right, we talk about Asian cities, talk about Western cities, right? But we do not forget Singapore as well. And a lot of our, faculty members, we have a vested interest in Singapore as well. So I think it's really important to have the opportunity to come to NUS geography and also think about how you can rethink Singapore. Okay, maybe not as a global city, but a city that is trying different ways to become world class, for example. Okay, so I'm going to end this off here, right? If there's only one thing that you are taking away from today's masterclass is how can we rethink what it means to be a modern city? Okay, is a modern city the so-called global cities that you talk about? Or can we even take cities like Jakarta? This is a picture of Jakarta, by the way, right? It looks very different, right? So you know that representation is very important. Okay, but I would like you to go home, okay, today and for the rest of your life even, right, try to rethink and question what you know about it. All right? With that in mind, thank you very much for your time. Okay, if you have any questions, please ask us. My colleague Kamal and myself will be happy to address them. Thank you.
So we'd like to invite you to ask any questions you may have. Please keep them contaminated. There are mics at the other side of the aisle. And those of you who are on Zoom, please feel free to post your questions via the Q&A or the chat function. Questions, please. Any questions? You can also shout it out from where you're sitting.
Yeah, please go ahead. Okay, before I answer the question, can I please trouble you maybe define a little bit what you mean by geographical investigation in your own words? Just one sentence, yeah. There will be many opportunities. Okay, we have a module that specifically teaches these kinds of methodologies, like both quantitative and qualitative. Okay, but the thing about geography modules as well, a lot of our assignments sometimes require you to go and do field work. Okay, obviously, realistically, we let you go to certain places in Singapore, or even before COVID, obviously, we had the opportunity even to travel in Malaysia, for example, but now not so much, right? Okay, so there will be a lot of opportunities for you to do very hands-on learning, because ultimately that's what geography is, the study of space. And we can study space in very abstract terms, like what I've talked to you about, right? What is global, what is blah, blah. At the end of the day, we also have the opportunity to study space on very concrete terms. Yeah, Kamal, would you like to add to that, please?
Hey, hi everyone. So I think the question here is around the scope of the fieldwork, right? So I think, yeah, we have been affected by COVID, right? But I think the kind of like undergraduate fieldwork opportunities definitely exist. So any module that you take, right, usually there's a component where you can sort of develop your own research question, right? A small project that's tied to your assignment. But as you sort of progress along in your fourth year, right, you have a final year project on honors thesis, there are lots of opportunities to also do research tied to professors' projects, what we call UROPs, undergraduate research opportunities, right? So professors actually have these kinds of projects where you can work with them, and that counts as part of your module. So your question is there a way for me to explore questions, my own questions, right? Yes, definitely, right? And the way we craft our assignments in geography and other departments as well is that we try to keep those broad. So they speak to the tenets of, say, concepts like sustainable development or urbanization. But the particular question that you might want to ask, there's scope for you to frame that yourself, right? And take that as a project. And it's possible to do that without going on field trip. That means looking at data sets that already exist, doing secondary sort of research, but for your final year project where you have a little bit more time, right? So in the past, we've had students go and actually conduct their own research where they collect their own primary data.
What are the job prospects for if I major in geography with a bachelor degree, or are there is there better career options? Like should I go and get a master's or PhD and specialize?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking this question, because frankly, I can give a whole talk about this question, right? But I'll try to be very concise. Okay, first and foremost, right, I want you all to rethink what you know about geography as well. Okay, there are 3 C's: content, competency, and character. Okay, for most of us, I mean, I'm Singaporean too, right? I went through the education system. Okay, so for most of us, we know that our primary, secondary education is very much focused on content. It's about, memorizing stuff and trying to apply them. Sure, fair enough, right? And so most of you might come in to FASS, for example, and think that, okay, if I major in geography, I am stuck to a certain module of content, which means I can only work in certain jobs. I want you all to dispel that thinking today, okay? Because I can say with confidence, okay, that if you take a social science, okay, especially a social science, so geography included, all right, what you are building is competency and character. So geography is a lens. It's not just a bag of content whereby you read stuff, but it's a way of training you to see the world and to see people in a certain way. Think about it as wearing a particular kind of sunglasses or whatever, right? So in our department, right, our teaching is oriented towards that. It's not just about, okay, today here's all the content, go and memorize, take exam, go. No. It's about really challenging you to change your beliefs, to change the way you write, the way you speak, the way you think. Okay, and to answer your question directly then, okay, the career opportunities, frankly, if you ask me, are actually potentially endless. Of course, if you want to take geography and you tell me you want to become a doctor, then, I mean, you have to certain disciplines, you have to take content-specific ones, like architecture, things like that. But I'll give you personal experience, right? I worked 3 years in the luxury marketing and sports industry before I became a professor, before I went to my PhD, master's, and became a professor. I was a geography major, right? But I went to the private sector and I did very well. Okay, so you don't just have to go to URA, HDB, and SLA and all these things. Of course you can. Our geography graduates have a really strong presence in these standpoints. And if you are very interested in urban planning, you're very interested in housing, of course you can, right? And geography allows you to do that. Okay, and I'll just say very, very briefly about PhD and master before I pass on to my colleague, because I'm sure there's a lot to say as well. Okay, I think that, you should go through the undergraduate studies first. Okay, take the opportunity to really enjoy yourself, to learn and change yourself as a person. Okay, focus on the studies, sure, but focus on making friends and things like that. Okay, when it comes to postgraduate studies, take your time to think about it. When you are in your 4th year, then you will have a much better idea. Because trust me, your representation of your imagination of graduate studies right now, right, trust me, is very different to what you will feel when you are in your 4th year. Okay, so that's number 1. So take your time, don't rush. Okay, number 2, will graduate studies help me in my employment prospects? Okay, I will say that if you have a PhD in Singapore, the prospects are not as wide as in other countries, whereby a lot of companies are more open to taking PhDs. In Singapore, if you ask me, if you want to work in the public or private sector, right? Okay, a master's is usually good enough. My personal opinion. Okay, other people might think differently. Okay, so think long and hard before you go into a PhD, because it's a long journey, it's a tough journey as well. Okay, but long story short, okay, don't think that geography can only give you these few jobs. It's, trust me, potentially endless. Okay, and I'm a living example of that. All right.
So just to add on one thing here, right? So, earlier on, Sean mentioned this thing about geography as a mini CHS, right? So I think this is this notion of interdisciplinarity, disciplinarity, right? So what we're talking about here is that if you take a geography, if you major in geography, right? In the first year, you will do like a gateway module, which is a 1101 kind of like entry module, right? In your second year, you have to take exposure, that means to physical geography, geographic information systems or GIS. Then you will learn methods, and then you will do like political and economic geography and social and cultural geography. So by the second year, you would have actually become, in a way, a very integrated geographer, right? So why is this important now? When you go out to work, you need to be able to integrate this kind of what geographers call spatiality, right? An understanding of social relations and space that talks about nature and the physical environment alongside human beings, right? So we're one of those disciplines where materiality, right? And it's like things like wind turbines, benches, roads, right? And physical spaces, mountains, volcanoes, rivers, right? You look at that image of London, the River Thames is running right through that, okay? That type of geography. And you saw the image about people hanging off buildings, right? Where the discipline that brings all of that together. So when you go out for a cocktail, right, for your first job, right, and you get asked that question and you're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to answer this? And it's the CEO of some company. I can promise you, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a geographer, that the geography degree will help you to answer whatever that question is. Okay? And I can tell you this because that was my experience, right? So my first job out of geography was with a consulting company, right? And it was part of the economist group, right? So I was there in a cocktail reception, people asking me about these kinds of things, but geography actually helped me to think about the world I lived in a very particular kind of way. And so this is what makes our discipline really unique, right? It brings that physical, the material, and the human aspect together. Okay, and that's really, really important, right? So that's my pitch for geography. All right. So yeah, so we'll take the next question.
Yeah, but sorry, just to add on to Kamal, right? But I just want to remind you again, because Kamal was talking about the benefits of integration perspective. But for some of us, like myself, okay, I'm ashamed to say that I'm not a very good physical geographer at all. Right? I'm a very much a human geographer. So for some of us who just want to specialize in human geography or physical geography, it's still possible. Okay, so I just want to re-emphasize this point. Okay, it's flexible. You can either be an integrationist or you can be a specialist within geography itself. That's fine.
Yep, at the back.
Sorry, are there any differences between the geography major provided here in FASS and exposed to the geography major in NUS College at Aggregate.
So I think one thing you have to remember is that NUS College, right, in a way it's a liberal arts college, right? So you will get specialists, right, who are talking about issues. So maybe they might be talking about urban studies, they might be talking about inequality, and maybe a geographical, there might be a geographer in that college, right? But it's not the same as an entire department that does a more holistic kind of geographical approach, right? So if you go to any liberal arts college, right, you will have basically people from different disciplines sitting together asking questions, right? THS is kind of unique in the sense that it takes a little bit of both, right? They ask those kinds of questions, but at the same time, what you are doing is you're becoming maybe you're majoring in geography and you're majoring in economics, and you ask those questions in that way, rather than just taking a broad-based approach or a liberal arts approach, right? So my answer to your question is that there will be a difference, right? Because if you major in geography and you're doing 15 modules in geography, right? At some level, even if you are doing maybe a handful of those are physical geography, number one, you would have to do, you cannot escape the physical geography. You'll have to do at least one, right? So the way we've set up our program in geography is that you will come out with an understanding of geography as a discipline, and there is a particular evolution of the discipline that you must understand to call yourself a geography major. So to me, that is quintessentially the different thing. So if you want to really understand geography, you have to come to us. I'm sorry, that's my stand.
Yes, we hope that you have enjoyed the class. Thank you once again, Dr. Leo. We have come to the end of the session, and if you have pre-registered for the walking tour, please head out to the tour booth outside LT11 to begin your tour. Due to safe management measures, we have limited capacity for these tours and only accept pre-sign-up. However, feel free to take a walk around the campus or take a shuttle bus to UTown and take part in the other activities throughout the day. And thank you. We hope you have a great day in NUS.
Thank you very much.